Very much, Kath. Yeah, I will do. So hi, everyone, and thanks a lot for the invite today. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. What are you seeing, the slides or me? Hopefully you're seeing the slides.
The slides.
Excellent.
The slides with you in the corner.
Excellent. So yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. This is a talk about a project that I'm involved with called the Green Forest Hoverfly Hunt. It's a project looking for one of the rarest hoverflies in the UK, and it just happens to be found in the New Forest, which is fortunate for people here if you want to go and see it. And I should just say at the start, I'm not an entomologist, I'm a geographer. I have a mapping company called MapPlume, and I basically for a living do environmental mapping projects. And very much this project arose out of, I guess, lockdown, where I started to take a much closer look at the insects in my back garden, particularly hoverflies. And I kind of got sucked into the Hoverfly recording scheme and Facebook group, and it was suggested that we might go out and look for this amazing hoverfly, the green forest hoverfly, or Calyptrobella speciosa. And I should say it's not just me. There's a whole team of us, 21 of us at the last count, plus others who've submitted records. And we're a mixture, mostly volunteer amateurs, but there's a couple of professional ecologists. You might recognise some faces here from the Society, Jan and Mike Crichton, Jan Schubert, and a few others that you may recognise. And so, yeah, that's the team. If I give you a bit of background, so Calyptrobella speciosa is what we're after. It's called green forest hoverfly by some orange wing hoverfly or the jewel wood fly, and there's not generally agreement about what to call it, but we've tended to stick with the green forest hoverfly for now, so that's what we'll call it. Essentially, it's found in ancient woodlands, so this is the sort of place that you would find it on a dead stump, where it's essentially strongly associated with. And as I said at the start, it's really found in just a couple of locations. So the New Forest and also Windsor Forest, and that's it pretty much. There's a few other records, but you know, pretty much confined to those two locations. And I don't know if anyone was at the talk with Steve Falk a few weeks ago, but this is one of these deadwood specialists. So it's a saprophilic species. It loves rotten beach stumps. That's where it lives. Its larval habitat is in the base of these dead and ancient trees. And anecdotally, there was some concern that it might be in trouble and may have declined in recent years. And it's very difficult to tell, though, because there was very few records in the sort of standard databases. So the Hoverfly recording scheme only had about 100 records ever, and there's only about 50 more on MBN, and not all of those are confirmed records. So not really a huge amount known about it in terms of data. So that's where, out of this Hoverfly recording scheme and the Facebook group that's associated with that we set up a project to go out and look for it. And so we set up a team in 2022. We went looking, and we only found one record after traipsing all over the forest. And there was 4 other records that year that we were made aware of. So it was pretty challenging. For those of you who don't know much about hoverflies, it's in the family Syrphidae. It's one of 107 fly species, and there's about 284 species in the UK out of 7,000 species of fly. I was absolutely gobsmacked that there was so much diversity and variety of flies. But the hoverflies make up about 280-ish. The numbers change because the taxonomy is changing and they're splitting further species down further. But essentially, it's about 284 at the moment. And you can tell it's a hoverfly because it has this false vein in the wing. So typically, dipterists or people who study flies look at wing patterns. But if you want to know if it's a hoverfly, almost 99 times out of 100, it will have this false vein, this vena spuria, which you can just see on this one here as well. Just a very, rather than a full vein on the wing, it's got this sort of ghost of a vein, which tells you it's a hoverfly. But onto our quarry, we're looking for Calyptrobella speciosa, the green forest hoverfly, and it's a pretty easy species, which makes it good for this type of volunteer-based survey. It's pretty easy to identify. It's very large. It's got this metallic green and black colouring. It's got orange wings and black patches on the wings, so it's pretty distinctive. And it's got these golden hairs on the abdomen. So, fairly easy to recognise, and it makes a noise as well as a buzz in flight. So that's what we're after. And like many hoverflies, you can also differentiate between the male and the female because of the separation between the eyes. It doesn't work for all species, but it's a good starting point if you're looking to tell whether it's a male or a female. The males tend to have eyes joined together at the front and the females separated. But it's not 100%, but it's a good guide, and that's true of green forest hoverfly as well. As I said, it's confined to just 2 locations. There are these other tantalising records elsewhere, but generally, if you want to find it, New Forest and the Windsor Forest are by far the best bet to go and see it. And it's categorised as near threatened by Ball and Morris when they last did the review of hoverflies statuses in the UK, but they basically felt like they needed more data. So that's the current sort of distribution. It's very, very localized. And the flight period is also very short. So if you're going to look for it, you've got a pretty limited window of opportunity, between early May and the end of June, peaking around mid-May to early June. So it's quite a narrow slot to go and find it. Across Europe as a whole, it's much more common on the continent, or more widespread certainly, and especially in sort of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands up to Denmark, and it extends all the way over to Azerbaijan in the east. So it's quite widespread. And in the UK, these are these other records, but essentially it's these 2 locations. So it's quite interesting, and we'll probably touch on some of that later. Just the European status. Again, they think it's of least concern in the red list of threatened species study of 2021. But again, they highlighted the need for more studies. And as I said, it was confined to these beach stumps, or it is confined to these beach stumps, and that's because the larvae live in the roots. So it's not a particularly attractive thing compared to its adult form, but this sort of typical rat-tail maggot larvae, which is it lives in the decaying, rotting roots of the beech trees. It's also found on the continent in oak as well, and was reared into an adult from some oak debris by this guy Desai. So in terms of our methodology, I mentioned that we'd crossed all over the forest in 2022 and only found 1, but what we did find was a lot of trees and suitable habitat, and we GPSed the locations, took photographs in order to be able to go and visit this year. So that was a good start. And we also significantly grew the team, partly thanks to the societies, the Hampton Natural History Society, who put out a call for volunteers. So we got several extra people through that route, and also through Wild New Forest. And we also engaged with the Forestry England to get a permit, and with the British Entomological Society. So that really helped us sort of formalise the survey. And in 2023, we had 21 people signed up, including my colleague, Yanis, who was helping on the mapping side. And the idea was to try and make it as easy as possible to get involved in the survey. So there was no maximum commitment or minimum commitment. You just did what you wanted to do, essentially. We made it so that people could turn up for 1 day and still contribute to the survey. And as we'll see later, people who turned up for 1 day did make amazing contributions. So that was really nice to see. And also, because I'm a mapping professional, I was able to use software from my company to help coordinate the work and to help better characterize and understand the sites. And so we had our platform, which is MapLoom, and it's got a range of different data layers that can sort of describe the sites. So we had the Forestry England, ancient woodland areas. If you're thinking about trying to locate this species and suitable habitat, the forest is a big place, so we're trying to narrow it down through different sets of data that would help us target our effort. And I'll come on to that in a little bit. But we had lots of different data layers, the terrain models, to show how accessible it was and things like that. We had all the past records, as you can see from the Hoverfly recording scheme. It's all clustered around one spot, which is Denny Wood, pretty much. And then there's other records elsewhere from MBN, these dark sort of red points. But as I said earlier, on the MBN, some of these are unconfirmed. So, these have never been confirmed, but there's a record up in Bramshaw and some others scattered around. And some of these are quite crude grid references as well. So, this one here is probably covering a much larger area, somewhere in that vicinity. So we had something to go on, but not huge amounts of data. And a lot of it, as I say, is confined to just one or two sites, Denny Wood and Markash Wood. We also had additional mapping layers, and I did some work on the Environment Agency LiDAR. So I don't know if you've seen this data set before, but essentially it's a laser that's flown on a light aircraft, and it puts a point on the ground every meter and gives a height value. So you can create this sort of terrain surface, and you can see the heights of different trees. And we kind of took that a little bit further in order to try and look at the density of the tree canopy. So hoverflies really like sunny sort of situations. They like to bask in the sun and warm up, and they sit around in the sun. And it's generally a good places to see them are the sort of sunnier areas. So what we wanted to do with this was to try to understand where those areas of the forest were very dense and closed and very shady versus those which were open and might provide a more sunnier environment. So this canopy density data set was part of that. And then we had also had access to other data sets like the ancient tree inventory. Again, a really amazing data set, shows specific tree locations and their status. So we were looking for dead and decaying old veteran beech trees from this data set as part of our search. And so the idea was to, as I say, try to come up with a way of narrowing down the search area. The forest is a huge place. We're trying to find the most suitable spots for Calyptrobola speciosa, green forest hoverfly. And using the mapping, we were basically able to develop a prioritization. So it was based on those which had already had existing records, those where we'd identified specific likely looking trees from previous years, or if they were adjacent to an existing site. And then we also used a combination of information from the ancient woodland inventory and ancient tree inventory, and also the ancient woodland extent. And so that gave us a map which we were going to target. So the darker the area, the higher the priority was for a visit. And we tried to encourage people to tick off the high priority ones first. But as I said, again, it wasn't really, people weren't forced to go anywhere. We just encouraged them to look in different places, and it was up to them if they did or not. And we were also relying quite a lot, as we had local people who knew the forest well. We also had people's local knowledge into the mix, so that we were able to try and find these locations. And what we did was also provided with the mapping platform the ability to see your location on a mobile phone. So you could basically see the tree you were heading for, you could see your current location and home in on specific trees. Because obviously, trying to find a specific tree in the middle of a forest it's not that easy. So having the GPS on the phone and being able to work out what direction you're in, we were able to very quickly not only get to those, but also to check against photos whether it was the right tree or not. So that was really, really valuable. And we started to use the Mapit platform also to build up information about the number of visits, any successes, and coordinates and other notes. So that was quite nice. Once you had got there, to a particular grid square, you had a number of options. So we did these, what we call stump vigils. So it's basically standing there staring at a tree, waiting for the hoverfly to appear. Or you could go for a general search of the square. We needed to scope out new squares and see if there was any suitable trees. That's quite a time-consuming thing, covering large areas of the forest just to see if there's any suitable habitat. And then yeah, we also just did more general searches for hoverflies within those squares. And so the idea was to kind of point people in the right direction, get them to search, and then report back what they found. And we used the map to track where people had been, where they were going, and so that we didn't have everybody just descending on the same square at any one time. And we also had a WhatsApp group in order to kind of coordinate that as well. So we were pinging messages off left, right, and centre to aid the search. And then once people had visited, then we updated the map. So we changed the colours of the squares. We showed those where people were planning to go, so that people could either avoid those squares, try somewhere else, or maybe they team up with somebody. It was quite open, really. And these are some of the surveyors in the field starting to have a look at some of the potential habitats and some of the target trees. As I said, the WhatsApp was pretty active. You know, we had all sorts of sightings and messages flying around, but that really helped in coordinating the effort and keeping people up to date with news of what we'd found. So that was a really good approach. And so on to the results. Well, the first record we actually heard about actually came from outside the team, and it was on the 15th of May, and it was in a really unlikely looking spot. It was a track on the middle of a sort of plantation. It didn't look anything like what we were looking for, and that was a female at a hawthorn flower, which was a bit of an odd one. And we think that might be to do with dispersal after it emerged. But anyway, our first record came from Brinkenwood by Colin Easton, who had found it at the same site in the previous year. So that was great. And then we knew it was on, you know, the hoverfly was on the wing then. So it really sort of got everybody motivated to go out and look. And that was really great. And we then found two males, so males at two new sites near Lyndhurst on the 16th of May. And those trees were actually identified by one of the volunteers after our initial kickoff meeting in the pub. She went for a walk in April and just happened to spot some trees, said these look quite good. And I went and checked them out in May, and lo and behold, it was there. So it's absolutely amazing. And she was only down for three days during the whole survey. So it was really, really impressive to get that insight and to then follow up and actually find the species on those trees. But what was good about that was it was quite accessible, and there was lots of people were able to go and visit it and get up to speed and see what it looked like. So it really helped people get their eyes in, and not only were they finding the same hoverflies, but they were also finding additional males and females as well, which we hadn't expected. So that was really good that they were finding more at the same site. And so after those successes, we spent the next few weeks searching, and we refound it at several sites, and we found it at many of our target trees. You know, it's a stunning thing, and it's, you know, really, really nice to see. And once we'd sort of had quite a lot of success, we then started trying to push the extents outwards. So we went north of the A31, and Colin Easton was the first to find it north of the A31, which was, you know, a first, apart from that disputed record or unconfirmed record rather. And then we also started to push east and westwards. And essentially after that, it was basically just trying to infill and connect the sites. And as it says, at times with considerable effort, trying to cover ground and establish its presence. And so if we look at the map, you can see the previous extent is these records here, the blue dots around Denny Wood. We've got some points from the NBN, but all of the dark red, not these light red, these are just visits, but all of the dark red is squares where we found it. So we found it in 30 new 1 kilometre squares across the forest. And you can see that it's got these sort of two distinct bands, one across the sort of northern part and one across the middle part. And what we were trying to do was see if we could connect these dots essentially. So we pretty much managed to get these two near connected belts, and I'm pretty sure we'll find it in these other locations at some point to further connect that. But what you notice is when you compare it to the ancient woodland polygons, the ancient woodland areas, is just how close the relationship is between the distribution of the species and those ancient and ornamental woodland areas. And that's probably to be expected. It's classified by those, but obviously it gives you a good basis to go and look. So I spent quite a lot of time fruitlessly looking here, and then there was several people trying to push the western extent, and then also the north up here in Bramshaw Wood, but we didn't quite get there at the moment, and we're not quite sure why. So that's quite interesting. Why weren't we finding it those locations when we were finding it elsewhere? It's very odd. And then, so just to say, in terms of numbers, we did much better than we expected. We generated 108 records, unique records, which, if you think about the previous results with only 150 ever in the standard databases, that's obviously quite significant. Obviously, that probably doesn't account for all the records. There'll be people that haven't recorded and so on, which is fine, but just to say that, that is a considerable jump on the number of available records than previously. 7 of those came from outside of the team, and so we were very lucky that people shared their records, and including one by Paul Brock, who I think is on the call, who found it at Windsor Forest doing some surveys up there. So that was great, and thanks, Paul. That was really nice to add that to the tally. So in total, we estimate that we found about 94 unique individuals, and pretty much most of them were males. 82 out of the 94 were male. Then going back to the pictures earlier, you can see the difference, the eyes joined together versus apart. We saw only 7 females, and then 5 others that we couldn't get to gender level just from the observation that we had. So pretty good stuff. And the flight period was, we had our first record on the 13th of May, the last one on the 19th of June. So it's quite a narrow window as we thought, but does give us a useful indicator. By teaming up with the Society and with Wild New Forest and people, we got some amazing photos. I'm a terrible photographer, but fortunately some people were very good, and we captured a lot of this sort of behavior, this typical sort of wasp-like dangling of legs that the males have. Really impressive to capture that. And it's kind of mentioned that in the guides that they're wasp-like, but it doesn't really explain why. But when you see that, you kind of do start to get an appreciation of it. And we saw several territorial males fighting, and we're quite interested to understand what's going on at these stumps. Are they getting knocked off? And I'll come back to that later. By other males and so on. We're just not sure at the moment, but presumably there's lots of territorial disputes going on. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'm just going to play you a video. So this is one of the ones that I found, which shows you this sort of leg dangling behavior. So this was near Lyndhurst again. You can see this sort of male just hovering around. And then I think there's I'm not sure how to get out of this now. Okay, I'll just go on to the next slide. And this is another male, which was really showing off. So this was one taken by Steve Laycock, and here's a male just kind of preening and making it himself look good for any passing females. But amazing to get so close and to get such good footage. But you can really see those wings and the sort of amazing coloration that they have, and you get them in the sun like that, and they're just absolutely like a golden sort of fly. They're absolutely amazing. Okay, we only saw 7 females, as I said. One of those, Mike Creighton from the Society, managed to capture a pair in cop, as we say, mating. And we also saw females entering the stumps and the debris at the base of stumps to lay eggs, presumably. So that was nice to capture. And just from all those observations, it became pretty clear that we were finding them at certain types of locations, and we've still got quite a lot of work to do to understand exactly what's going on there and the precise nature. But pretty much exclusively, they were at beech stumps. We only had one at oak, which I'll show you in a minute. We only had that first record at flowers. So flower visits are important because they help us understand, what's important habitat-wise and more about the ecology of the species. But we only had one single flower visit, and that one wasn't even confirmed to be feeding at the time. It was at rest on a hawthorn. But generally, these sites where we find it are in sunny situations, so on these really well-rotted beech stumps. They tend to be on the ones where there's at least some of the roots and the stump left in the ground. So where you have like snap from heart rot and sort of subsequent snapping of the trunk, that seemed better than those where, when you've got waterlogged ground, the tree falls with the root plate, it's still attached. So we needed this sort of debris in the ground, and felt that was important, and we hope to do some more work on the characterization next year to try to see if that's true. We haven't really got the evidence, but that's our strong suspicion. And usually where there's some surrounding vegetation. So this is the typical trees where we were finding them, really well rotted down. Heart rot has got through them, and basically they're just there leaving a pile of debris, and the males would sit here presumably waiting for the females, and then lay their eggs in this or other similar, females would lay their eggs in this or other similar sort of habitat. Again, Mike and Jan were the only people to find an oak sighting for Calyptrobella speciosa of the green forest hoverfly. No one else saw it at an oak stump. It was just this one tree, which was really interesting because on the continent it's much more common, and I'll come back to why that might be important in a bit. The amount of sunshine also seems to be interesting and something we want to look at. So this was a site up in the north where at a certain time of day, I think it was the morning, the base of the stump was in sun and the hoverfly was there. But as the sun moved round, it disappeared. So we think that the amount of holly and surrounding vegetation could have an influence. And one of the things we're going to be hopefully working with Forestry England this next season coming is to clear some of the holly around target trees to see if we can get it to appear. So it's hopefully going to be influencing their holly management, but we're going to do some experiments around that. So before I sort of conclude, just wanted to come to some of the other hoverflies. And again, I'm not sure how many hoverflies you're familiar with, but these are some of the supporting cast, as it were. Some amazing things. The one I want to particularly point out is the one in the middle, this heath antfly, Microdon analis, and it's like a little sort of stocky fella. But what's interesting about it is its larvae, as the name suggests, are dependent on ants' nests, and particularly those of Elaseus niger, the black ant, essentially. And it's got these amazing tank-like larvae, which are especially adapted to feeding on the larvae and pupae of these ants. And they have this sort of armor plating to kind of protect them from the adult ants. So they actually live under the bark of trees in ants' nests and start to sort of wander around feeding on them. So that eventually will turn into one of these. But yeah, quite interesting. The other interesting flies that you see are the bumblebee mimics. So we have this diamorphic bumblefly, which actually mimics not one but two species of bee. So the first one is mimicking Crearina it's called Crearina beberina, but the dimorphic bumblefly, but it mimics the common carder bee. And then the dark form is mimicking tree bumblebee. So absolutely amazing. The same species mimicking two different species of bee. And they were often found in association with our target species. And then similarly, we've got another Crearina, this buff-tailed bumblefly, as it's called, which has these light patches by its hind legs, slightly different, but again, trying to mimic presumably the bees like another bee species. But by far the prize-winning one, although you'll probably only get a view like this, which is pretty what I had. This is another bumblebee mimic. This is Pacota personator, and the Eurasian Pacota, it's called. And that's the sort of view you get. Our colleague Russell Wynn from Wild New Forest managed to get a slightly better picture. But if you're extremely lucky, you might get very close up, and you can see that this is actually a fly, even though it looks really like a bumblebee. So it's absolutely an extraordinary mimic. But yeah, that's closely associated again with these ancient woodland beach rot holes where its larvae develop. And then we also saw some other pretty spectacular things. So Anthracene hairy, which is one of the only, I think it's the only hoverfly that doesn't have that vein that I talked about, but that's super rare. And our team also had Melota symbiociformis, the northern bee mimic, and then I managed to find this orange belted spine leg, although it wasn't identified until later by one of the experts on the recording scheme. The other ones that you're more likely to see in your garden, which are very closely associated with green forest hoverfly, are these. So we've got golden-tailed leaf walker. You can see it looks very like our target species. Got a golden tail, beautiful thing, and the orange belted leaf walker, or Xylota segnis. And then this one, which is very common hoverfly, but it's got the amazing name common Batman fly because of its Batman logo on the back here. So it's really distinctive. Once you get to know this, you see it's got the Batman symbol on the back. So it's a good way to tell it. But yeah, they were very common. They larvae develop in rot holes and boggy areas and things. So it's a good one if you've got a hoverfly lagoon in your garden, they'll turn up. But yeah, those are some of the other things. And in total, we saw 41 species, which isn't amazing, but we're pretty sure that there's a lot more out there to be found, and I'm sure Paul Brock will be able to tell more about that than I will for the forest as a whole. But we doubled our count on last year from 20 to 41, and as I say, there's probably a lot more to be found. So if we have a slight change of emphasis from the sort of ancient woodland and sort of start to work on the rides and maybe look a bit more at the blossom, then we probably turn up a lot more as well. So in conclusion, the green forest hoverfly is probably a bit more widespread and not doing quite so badly as we thought. I mean, obviously this is only 1 year. It might have been a fluke with the weather because it was a really nice May, but it's also probably under-recorded. Most people have tended to look in the well-known sites, and so the reason we turned it up elsewhere is probably because no one else has really looked in detail elsewhere, like that, or in such a way that we have. We've coordinated a team of 20 people to go to specific areas, so it's probably a bit under-recorded, but we obviously want to continue the work and see if we get the same sorts of results next year to prove that it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a one-off. And it's clear that the green forest hoverfly is part of a bigger assemblage of insects and fungi that rely on these decaying beach. And we know that there's lots of that habitat in the New Forest. And what was interesting, we had Russell Wynn, who is a fungal expert as well, and he was saying that the distribution of green forest hoverfly was very similar to some of the very rare fungi that he looks at. And it's this assemblage that seems to be important around these ancient and dead veteran trees that's going to be going to make this quite a unique set of habitat requirements that we need to understand more, and also trying to understand why we weren't finding it in areas where it looked really good. We found loads of suitable habitat in ancient woodland, but we just didn't find it, and didn't find the green forest hoverfly. So we're not entirely sure why. And the fact that it relies on these beach falls, there should be a good supply of new dead wood for the next 50 years or so. But beyond that, it's difficult to know, whether those young trees are going to be replaced. Longer term, beech as a species is thought to be under threat from climate change because of the drier conditions. Is going to push the extent of beech woodland further north. And in the UK, that could be a bit of a problem for the green forest hoverfly because it's only relying on these beech trees, it seems. We had this one record at oak. On the continent, it uses oak quite happily, and chestnut and a few other species. But in the UK, we don't seem to find it. So if beech is in trouble, then potentially our hoverfly is in trouble. And so we need to try to understand, are there any areas nearby where it could move to? It doesn't fly very far, even though it's a pretty big and robust hoverfly. It doesn't seem to be able to it doesn't want to move beyond the New Forest and the Windsor Forest. So one of the things we're kind of trying to understand is there anywhere else that it might turn up? And also, what would be the prognosis if it wasn't able to adapt to a more oak situation, to lay its eggs in oak in the future. So we need more data, and obviously we're going to look and try to do more in 2024. But hopefully, we'll be able to sort of start to answer some of those questions. So our next steps are to obviously try to understand that a bit more. So to push on, find new sites in the New Forest, to try and find it further afield potentially, or to find suitable habitat further afield. I think most people think that's very unrealistic, but sounds like a challenge to me to try and turn it up outside of the New Forest or Windsor Forest. We want to do some more detailed habitat characterization to understand, what's going on, why are some stumps better than others, and so taking measurements and looking at surrounding habitat and the degree of openness and all of that. We want to understand longer term, the supply of beech and grazing impacts, so we might start to look at that. And there's also things like temperature and the timing of emergence. So that issue earlier where we saw the sun moving round and suddenly the hoverfly appears, there's obviously something going on, that the conditions become right and it appears. We were trying to understand that a bit better. And as I say, we've potentially got some experiments with the Forestry England to look at the impacts of their holly management. The final one was to do with DNA barcoding. So the green forest hoverfly hasn't been genetically sequenced yet, and one of the suggestions for next year, and we've been talking to the Natural History Museum about this, is to put it into the Darwin Tree of Life project, which not only will provide the full genetic sequence, but will also provide a barcode which would allow us to compare the genetics of the UK population with those which have already been sequenced on the mainland of Europe. And that's potentially useful because if it is under pressure, it is under threat in the UK, then the population's genetic diversity is potentially quite poor, and there may be opportunities to reintroduce more genetic variation in the future if that was to become an issue. So the suggestion is that we take a couple of specimens, send them off to the Natural History Museum in London to have that sequencing done. And then the final, that wasn't the final one is to do some mark release recapture studies to see if we can work out how it's moving around. I talked about in the first part this dispersal, this odd record of a female in unlikely habitat. Well, they're obviously dispersing from the nest somehow or at some point, but not the nest, the where they lay their eggs in these stumps. So the larvae are pupating and then emerging as adults, and then they disperse. And by marking individuals, we think we might be able to work out, at least how they're competing within each other, the males at the sites, and whether we can see whether they're moving between sites. So this is me experimenting in the garden with some paint pens. Not sure these are quite waterproof enough, these Posca pens, but I just pinched them off my son. But they tend to work, and this is a very small hoverfly. This is a marmalade hoverfly, so quite small, but I was able to put dual dots on them. So I know the principle works. It's just whether the longevity will be there in terms of whether it will stay on for more than a few days or a couple of weeks, which is probably the life expectancy we expect. So again, we've agreed with Forestry England to do a small trial to see if we can pick up any movements either between trees or between sites. So that'd be really exciting. And as a mapper, obviously, I'm quite interested in seeing what the spatial aspects of that are.
Between two bricks.
So just to leave you, I hope that's given you some sort of excitement for hoverflies. I kind of been a bit hooked really, and that's largely down to the Hoverfly recording scheme and the Facebook group. So if you take photos, you can post pictures into the Facebook group, and they'll provide you with an identification. And if you don't record, they'll even record it for you. So they're really interested and really supportive if you provide records to them. Here's just some examples of posts where I've submitted things and you get sort of feedback, and it's just really, really helpful. You get corrections on identifications. They're an amazing group, the UK Hoverflies Facebook group. So if you're interested in hoverflies, and I've probably seen about 60 or 70 species in my garden now, which is amazing. And they're all very, very different and really smart looking. So yeah, I definitely encourage you to check out the Facebook group, the Hoverfly Recording Scheme website. And then if you're interested in a bit of more wider reading, this is the Bible for the beginner, essentially, the Bull and Morris guide. You've also, as a society, produced the Hoverflies of Southampton, which is great. It tells you what you might expect to turn up locally. And then once you get hooked like I did, then you can move on to the more advanced keys and things, which are Stubbs and Falk, and this one which published this year, which is Bot and Vandermeter. So yeah, with that, just a quick thank you to the team. So these are the people involved. Some of them you'll know. We've also had records externally and expert input from the likes of Roger Morris in the UK and some colleagues from Europe, Wout and Frank. And I think Paul Brock, who's on the call, and George Else have been really helpful in imparting all their knowledge of the species when I've exchanged emails with those. So yeah, it's been really helpful to have that expert input. And then we also just want to say thanks again to the Society for providing us with such amazing volunteers getting involved, and Wild New Forest, and we've got support from the other organisations as well. So with that, I'll just say, are there any questions? And if you are keen to get involved, then we're looking for people again for next year. So yeah, if you're interested, you can just drop me a line. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Andy.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Mm-hmm. So has anyone got any questions? A lot of food for thought, I think.
Can I raise a question? Sorry, I wanted to put my hand up to be polite, but I can't find the hand symbol. So that was a great talk, Andy. Thanks very much. It's fascinating, isn't it, that the green forest hoverfly seems to favour oak on the continent and beech stumps over here, and it's really puzzling as to why that is. I just wonder, the larvae of the rat-tailed maggot type that like to live in a kind of soup, don't they? And I just wonder whether there might be something fungal going on. So whether there's fungi involved in that soup, and whether, kind of connected into the mycorrhizal network or something. And whether we could find anything out about that. I don't know. Do we know anything about the composition of this soup? And are there plans to sort of do an analysis?
It's a really good question. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks for your input. Jeff was one of the 7 from 2022. So he's certainly helped with this project massively. In terms of the question, I think I should say that it's not purely oak on the continent. It is beech and oak and chestnut. It's just that for some reason in the UK, it seems to be mostly beech. But in terms of the if you think about the nature of how trees rot, and I've sat like I have been thinking about this quite a bit lately. But you look at a beech tree and it crumbles, and it gets this heart rot initially, and it rots before it falls, and then once it goes, it just starts to crumble and it breaks down into a really, really fine powder. If you look at an oak tree, if it's standing, it's rock hard. It doesn't crumble. I think I only found one tree that was an oak tree and it was somewhere near Bewley River, that even looked remotely similar to the sorts of trees we were looking at. So there's definitely something going on there with the nature of the rock. And it could be that there's a species of mushroom or fungus rather on the continent that's providing that that sort of breaking, the similar way of breaking it down. But when you look at an oak tree that's died, especially those that have fallen over, they're rock hard, and they take ages and ages and ages to break down. I mean, others will be far more knowledgeable than me about this, but I suspect that there is something fungal going on, and perhaps other factors as well. I don't know, but it's an interesting one. And if beech trees are in trouble, then and it's got nowhere to go, then the obvious next point of call would be to go to a different species. And if it's known to be supported by oak, then maybe that's an option, but it doesn't seem to be at the moment.
Has anyone got any more questions?
I haven't got a question as such, but just to say that Andy's not only been involved heavily in obviously providing the platform for the survey, but he's also done a really great job in providing a platform for the Hoverfly recording scheme, which has been interestingly called Surfboard, SYRPH board, which is a really good interface. So thank you very much for that, Andy. That works really well.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Yeah, so that was designed really just to make it easier for people who are recording hoverflies regularly to submit records to the scheme. There's various ways you can submit records via iRecord and iNaturalist, and there's a spreadsheet, and you can submit them via the Facebook group. But for those people who are recording regularly, it just provides a lot of quick tools to enter the records. So yeah, if you do get into recording hoverflies, then you should check it out. But there are other alternatives are available.
So do you really reckon that you've got about 60 to 70 species in your garden? I've recorded so far in my modest suburban garden here in Southampton, I've recorded 48 species since the lockdown in 2020.
I've definitely got 60 something.
Wow.
I've got 80. Well, there's some just to genus level, so I need to see. But yeah, it's very, very well. It's not easy, but you can certainly rack up a big list. It depends on how determined you are, and if you take specimens, because a lot of these species are quite difficult. You need a specimen and a microscope to discern the features. It relies on those patterns on the wing and genitalia and other microscopic features that you just can't see. Although with macro photography, a lot of the features are becoming more doable, and the recording scheme, if you post it, we'll try to get to an ID on the Facebook page, but if they can't, they'll at least give you a family. So it's amazing scheme. It's probably the one of the most responsive Facebook groups ever, in terms of if you post a photo, they'll come almost immediately back with an ID. And because they're interested in the record, they're motivated, and it's a great group.
I can't actually think of any insect recording scheme anywhere in the world that is as up to date as the Hoverfly recording scheme, in that you can actually monitor almost real-time changes in the abundance and distribution of species. And there's some interesting patterns that Roger Morris and colleagues have been finding, that relate to recent curious changes in weather. So for many years, we've been puzzling over the declines of insects. And there haven't been a lot of these long-term recording schemes. But I think recently, with the advent of Facebook, and especially the Hoverfly recording scheme, but there are also other recording schemes, for example, tachinid flies and a lot of different flies, for example. We're starting to get some really good crowdsourced data, being able to monitor the sort of fate of these insects. So it's actually quite fascinating, and all of us can get involved in this. Anybody can record anything you see in your garden. You can record this. You can go into iRecord. It's actually very simple. So it's quite a really interesting. It's a really interesting time to be involved in this. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say it's really undervalued as well. If you think about like all the hoo-ha there is about climate change and species loss and all this lot, it's surprising how undervalued insect recording and wildlife recording is. There's all of these tools, but what it relies on is people who know what they're doing, experts to contribute and to give their time. And people like Roger Morris are so generous with their time because they'll provide these IDs and they'll do recording and whatnot. But there's concern that it's down to a few individuals and they're increasingly strapped and don't have the time. So I think there's a big effort to try and get another generation of entomologists through to be able to identify things so that you can track what's happening with individual species. If you can't identify stuff and you don't know what's there, if you don't record, how will you know what's of value and how it's doing? And that's kind of the motivation for the scheme, is to try to generate as much information as possible. And people like Roger will put out as you say, little articles on the Facebook groups, to just little bits of analysis of data or modelling that they've done, and it's fascinating stuff. But is it sustainable longer term? That's the problem. There's so few people who are able to do that, and it's a concern, I think. But fortunately, we have people like that who are so generous with their time.
Just want to make a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, sorry I'm late. I forgot it was happening, but thanks for Kathy to reminding me. The Hoverflies of Southampton, our little booklet. I just want to point out something. We do have it on our website, and on the website, all the identifications of the pictures in there are correct. There's about 7 mistakes in the booklet. I can't remember what they are now. So be careful with a booklet if you've got it. There's 7 mistakes with the pictures. Very hard to find them all, and we didn't. So
no, that's fine. I think it's
these things happen with insects.
Work.
So difficult to identify sometimes. So bear that. And also, one more question: has anyone looked in Savernake Forest? That strikes me as a possible
that's
place.
The number one target for several people have suggested that. I don't know it, but that would be, if it is going to move somewhere, or if it is present somewhere else, it would be somewhere like that. But it has to have, I think, again, Paul probably would have more insight on this than I. But I suspect it needs certainly a significant number of those dead and decaying dead beech trees, essentially. But yeah, I'm keen to look somewhere else. I don't buy it. If there are these random records elsewhere, then it's like Colin used to call it the Hail Mary option, where he would go to the edges of the forest trying to push the boundaries. But I don't know what that makes this one. It's a lot further afield. But it would be like a lottery win or something.
Well, most woodlands don't look obviously very suitable, do they? But that one might be different. Although I think there is more oak there than beech, to be honest. But yeah, thank you.
Paul,
Bill, can I just say that I did a survey at Savernake back in 2018 and recorded a number of hoverflies, but I was mainly asked to survey the coleoptera there, but no sign of caliprobola at all. But there's quite good species there. But Savernake is a little bit disappointing. Even the coleopterus are not too happy there. Anyone from that area will tend to come to the New Forest or Windsor or somewhere else because there's more to be found. So it's a bit of an odd wood, it's I suppose things can't travel very far from A to B, and a lot of stuff has probably died out over the years.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite agricultural all around it, isn't it, as well, compared to the New Forest, where there's lots of other habitats in the vicinity, even into Dorset and that, isn't there? So
and Paul, Paul, while you're here, could I ask you about Windsor Forest? Because I don't know that site at all, but how similar or how different is it from the New Forest where you found it?
It's fairly different, but it's found in places like the Great Park. It's probably easier to find because where I go is private land, so you have to have a special permit to go there, and they're not keen to issue them. But the Great Park, you wouldn't have any major problems, I don't think. But the problem is, the parking costs money there now, so I think it costs probably a few pounds just to park for an hour or something like that in the Great Park. But I park straight in the car park, straight in front of my car. There's Calapropola, so sitting on brambles and things. And that was a bit of a distance from the dead wood, actually. So they're obviously flying about, just sunning themselves and so on. Having said that, when I've wandered around the dead wood, I've rarely seen them. Although this year's find in Windsor was basically where a number of beech trees have been cut down, and I was looking for Coleoptera there, and all of a sudden, Calapropola straight in front of me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think when I was speaking to Roger Morris about whether it would be found elsewhere, his point was that people looking for Coleoptera would have probably spotted it elsewhere if it was there. So, I don't know what the chances of finding it anywhere else are. I don't know the veracity of the records that were from Exeter and these other places. I don't know, again, Paul, if you know, but Roger said at least one of those is from a very reliable source.
Right.
But just isolated records aren't enough, I don't think, to warrant a visit there. But if we can find places like Sevenoak Forest which might have it, then I'm happy to go and have a look, and I know others are as well. So
I've been there in May and June various times and not seen it. So
that's useful.
I have doubts it will be found there, to be honest with you. And I found a number of hoverfly species there.
Yeah.
But worth a look sometimes. It's like Windsor, you can go there I went there one day in June and found lots and lots of rare beetles. The next day, virtually nothing. So you just don't know. Not that I go there every day, because obviously I live near the forest, so it's but it just makes an interesting change to see what's happening somewhere like Windsor, where perhaps the dead wood is better than some parts of the forest where it's been perhaps going downhill in recent years.
Yeah.
Especially somewhere like Denny Wood, which has deteriorated somewhat compared to the numbers of insects one could find. When I first moved here, 2008, there were lots of insects. You could walk around Denny Wood, find absolutely tons of insects, and compare that to nowadays. You sometimes struggle to find the same beetle species, even some of the commoner ones. But at least you can still find them in the New Forest.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing, is that obviously we're looking for this hoverfly, but the number of other things you see is absolutely incredible, like the beetles and the wasps and birds, and we've got quite a list being generated that we need to kind of go work through. But certainly Jan and Mike Crichton were John Schubert, Mike Crichton, we're really finding all sorts, and they've got a big list that they've sent me that I still have to pull together. But amazing things that you can see while out looking for this.
And these saproxylic insects often have conservation status, so they're either be nationally scarce or nationally rare, which with red list status. So
and just going back to Jeff's point, that's one of the reasons it might be a bit more challenging to go and explore the larvae situation, because obviously you're going to be rooting around in, these very protected. When we've spoken to the ecologist at the Forestry England about it, I don't think she was that keen for us to go digging around looking for larvae or puparium. But that's something that if we keep going, hopefully we'll be able to look at in the future. I mean, it may be that we can create lagoons. If we could somehow create lagoons next to stumps to see if they would even use them or visit them, that would be quite interesting. But again, you'd probably still have to take some of the material from the base of the tree to do that, to create this sort of porridgey like stuff that they might consider using. But you know, the pine hoverfly, Blera ferax in Scotland, has been successfully introduced into hoverfly lagoons as part of the conservation effort. So again, if it's struggling longer term, then that would be a potential route to help. But we just haven't explored that. But I know there's people on the team who are very keen to do that. But it's just, we can only do so much. We're only a small, well, we're a large-ish team, but you know, we're all limited time. So we shall see.
Can I just ask a question about what we know about the habitat surrounding the oak on the continent? Because so in the New Forest, obviously, we're talking about ancient woodland where we're interested. Are all the oak sightings on the continent in ancient woodland? I mean, presumably they're not in the middle of, you know, amenity parks or something like that.
I really don't know, to be honest. I think the suggestion was that one of the experts had found it in his garden. So I think that the jury's out on that. But you know, I'm quite fancy a field trip to Belgium to go and find out. But no, the answer is we just don't know, and probably there's literature out there, and we need to probably go into it. But you know, we're busy. I mean, it's interesting because obviously, having only found one last year, we were kind of just happy to find them this year. So our methodologies and our the things we were trying to find out weren't that ambitious. Whereas I think now that we've found quite a few, we're very ambitious. What I'm just hoping is that last year wasn't a fluke, and we don't go out and plan all this stuff and not find any hoverflies. So it's a really good question, though. We just don't know, and obviously longer term, if we're thinking about the future of the species, to understand what's happening on the continent, I think is probably quite important.
Well, I think unless anyone's got any more questions, maybe we should end it. And thank you for your time in talking to us, and you know, really enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And if you want to, you can look at the website link and see more information and videos and so on. And if you're interested in getting involved, if you fancy doing a day in the forest, let us know. Lovely to have you.
That'd be lovely. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah.